All right, everybody hear me fine? All right, so this is testing malware scenarios in your environment. This is basically introducing the idea of a different kind of test. We do pen tests, we do vulnerability assessments. This is going to be introducing a different kind of test. I'm Tony, I work for Tenable. It's just a little bit about me. Yeah, I totally didn't account for me being in front of the damn thing.
Hi, my name is Juan, Corte, also employed at Tenable, research department, and same thing, kind of just, eat, sleep, and dream code and malware and all that good stuff. So.
All right, so a little bit of overview. Basically with the test, we're going to go through how to perform it, what it is, the concepts, what you need to do for it, and then we're going to have semi-demo. It's more a conceptual demo. So, malware testing. A lot of people do testing for vulnerabilities inside their environment, but malware doesn't require vulnerabilities to get in. So this is going to be talking a lot about testing, how to test malware being inside your environment, how to perform those tests, what you need to look at, and different steps to go through to interact with those kind of functions. Really, the difference between malware testing and pen testing, vulnerability assessments, different things like that, is going to be a lot of these things right here. Most pen tests don't worry as much about persistence. They're in and out. Malware is mostly about persistence, so it's going to be sticking around for a longer period of time. It's about detecting that persistence, being able to see what's going on. Most pen tests, vulnerability assessments, all these kind of things don't worry about rootkits as far as kernel level exploits and getting planted in that way. Sometimes they're actually out of scope completely. And all the phishing and all that kind of stuff that's associated with malware.
So we want to throw a couple of stats out there just to kind of back up our, concept here, kind of show that malware, it's obviously out there, obviously affecting us. It's not nothing new, but to the reports that I chose, my personal favorite are Verizon's 20 DVI report and the TrustWave GCR report. Just quickly, it's 40% of the action that the Verizon reported belongs to malware, so it's definitely out there. Most infections come from emails, so definitely not something we can be, taken away from us, but obviously a good entry point for every attacker. The TrustWave report, a little different. Focus. They do more PCI stuff and compliance and all that good stuff. So I just thought it was interesting that 50% of the malware that they detected contain memory scraping code. Obviously you get in POS system, you want to scrape information out of there and move on. Now the interesting thing too is the increase of scripts. Right, it's something that you can either look at it through either getting smarter. You got Windows 7 and 7 and above now. It comes PowerShell. No need to write all that crazy assembly code in C and C++ code. You can just go ahead and script out your stuff with PowerShell. A lot of cool PowerShell stuff that you can do out there. And then, I just thought it was interesting, and probably nothing pertained, but 6 groups. If anybody tracks malware crime out there in groups, love to talk to you about it. Hear your stories. I don't do it personally, but it's always fun to hear how people just track everything down and move on. And then just moving on a couple more slides, we see the increased usage of files within files, the whole Russian nesting doll concept. You have a PDF file, then you have a flash file inside within another flash file, and then, you serve up your malware. Quickly too, 60% of malware is still being packed by UPX. Again, nothing too important, but again, it's either it's effective or we're just, we're not very good at detecting it. And obviously the increased use of mobile malware, different topic, different area, but definitely rising, and both reports mention it.
So I do work at Tenable, and one of the primary things I work on in Tenable is malware. One of the plugins that we have that we released, I think it was last year, is plugin 59275. It's the one that does the hash analysis for malware detection. Just to give a little bit of perspective, we have 12,500 hits in a 30-day span. That means 12,500 infections detected that enterprise customers were not detecting with whatever they had at that time. One thing that's big about this is a low-end hit number too, because we do a two-sides caching system. Basically, we cache on the front side and on the back side. On the front end, this is the stuff that we see off of our analysis on the back end. but as soon as we do analysis, we cache forward. So that 12,500 that we're seeing is a very low number compared to what the overall stats are. So we're seeing a huge number of things that companies don't have their antivirus or whatever their detection rates are detecting right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go through is some conceptual ideas on how to perform these tests, what the tests are, where to go through. So initially,
training. I think we all want to get trained. Different areas you can do it. But essentially, I like this. This is coming from my experience from a year and a half ago from starting to learn all this stuff. You want to learn your tools. Make sure that you have tons of tools out there, tons of scripts, tons of people that like to share what their code does and how do they do it. So it's not one tool that's going to get you across point A to point B. Just get to learn your tools and get that right knowledge. The next one is I personally think you need to understand code at a high and low level. I'm talking more in assembly, disassembly, C and C++ code. Pertaining to Windows, you got to be able to understand the Windows API, see how attackers are leveraging that API calls to make bad stuff happen in your system. And last but not least, kind of the live infections. So a while back I was talking to Tony and I was like, Tony, I've done all this training, all this learning, all these books, all these tutorials, but I still don't see that I'm really getting what I need to understand and know where to look. And kind of just said, you just got to dive into the deep end. So, with that said, you're just going to get a malware, get live infected, and just do it. Just get infected and figure out what it's doing. It's calling back home, debug it, disassemble it, whatever it is that you're going to do with it. And then the other thing too is ad hunting. So focusing highly on the idea here that you have to have a highly controlled testing scenarios, right? I mean, you're dealing with malware, you don't want to get infected on your corporate environment, so you want to have controlled network closed out, And then from there on, just a couple ideas. You have 3 hosts, give them 3 hosts, and then have them find the infected one. It could be either by logs, it could be by which process is infected, or which host is calling out to the network that it's not supposed to. And the other one is static analysis on files. You just kind of want to take your malware, take it apart statically. Find out if it's packed, find out if it's signed. If it's and just kind of break it down there without having to run it.
So one thing on the egg hunting, remember this is a type of test that we're proposing. What this means partially is get 3 boxes set up inside of your network. Have them look mostly close to the way that you set up boxes. And then have one of them have some form of infection, whether you write it yourself or you take something from malware.lu or whatever, Contagio or wherever website you pull it. Infect those and then have your people try to figure out which one's affected and see how they react to that infection as far as what are they going to do when they find an infected box. A lot of times on these pen tests, we're so concerned about stopping them at the firewall and stuff like that, that the security people don't necessarily know how to react to when they have an infection. This is a lot of time incident response people control this, but a lot of companies don't have incident response as well. So this is about that. Another thing is testing your incident response people. Pen tests test some degree of this, but not very much. But if you want to see how your incident response is working inside your company without actually having to wait until you get a live infection, infect some things and just say, handle it. What would you do if you're in this situation? Put a rootkit on a system, see if they know even how to maintain or work with the rootkit on a system. And this is my personal favorite. This is the more complicated one and the one that's going to be one of the larger issues as far as doing the testing. It's the random unknown. Find some place on your network, some box, some place, infect it. Don't infect it with a live piece of malware, that'd be dumb. Do a controlled situation to where either you write it or you're running, and we're going to go through some scenarios of how you can actually do this. But infect a random box in your network. Have one person that basically knows and controls that random box infection and maintain and see if it's ever detected. And when it is detected, see what detected it. Because you might have a $1,000, $2,000, $30,000 appliance that's not doing jack for detection inside of this when you've got a free tool that's detecting all the stuff. So if you do this inside your live environment and you're detecting it with something that's a completely free tool, you can save yourself money as well, and also learn where you need to look and what tools you need to look at. All right. So this is going to be basically some ideas on where to get started. When you do these kind of tests, these are going to be the things that you should really hit on initially to help facilitate these tests. So persistence, and this is really one of the big things that I was hitting on from the initial part. Malware is persistent. It's not one of the things where they're going to come in like the theoretical things that we test right now. They're not going to come in, drop everything, get out. Malware wants to get in, and it wants to get as far out as it can, and it wants to hide the best way it can. If you want some ideas on where to cause persistence, auto runs. It's a tool for defense. Will tell you every single location. Well, not every single. It tells you a lot of locations where you can actually have code stay persistent. Just look through what's located on that. I've found over 200 locations that's beyond auto runs that you can actually have persistence, and I'm not talking about just DLL injection points, because those are almost infinite. Hijacking, different kind of exe file redirection, a lot of malware handles that. Finding ways to stay persistent. If you want to find a way to stay persistent on a system that's not very well detected, not very many tools, use Firefox. Their plugin infrastructure is horrible. They have no security around their plugin infrastructure, so you can go drop an infection file in a directory. As long as you get it dropped there, load by Firefox. If they use Firefox, it stays persistent.
Kind of just touching on points that Tony mentioned. DLL hijacking, nothing new, but definitely effective and useful. Just basically, again, go back to the idea. Find an application that's vulnerable to DLL hijacking. There's, tons of them. Find one that's being used in your environment. It could either be a text editor, Notepad++, or Sublime, maybe a snipping tool that your company uses. I'm pretty sure that you can find it vulnerable to some sort of DLL hijacking. You just want to take that and again go back to your scenario where you have 3 hosts, have the application get infected, and tell your team, find me the application, or you don't even have to tell them, but find the application that has that DLL hijacking. The points are, it's just a little bit of history of what DLL hijacking. We're not going to get into it, but if you have any questions afterwards, be more than free to talk about it.
So one thing with DLL hijacking as well is it's not easy to detect. So that's a good persistence way to really test you guys if they can detect something like that. So another thing is rootkits. Rootkits are really a malware thing. It's not really anything that we really test right now, and I hit on this earlier. You don't have to have a rootkit to emulate what a rootkit does. And that's one of the biggest things on this talk is don't really infect your systems. You can make everything look like a piece of malware without being a piece of malware. So do something simple like use the system load on call image technique to load a rootkit. You have to be very careful when you do this because there is basically non-page full issues. It won't page out, and if it does page out, it'll blue screen your system. So make sure you know what you're doing. I suggest the rootkit arsenal book. It's absolutely awesome. Has tons of source code inside of it where you can actually pull the direct source out of it. The other two are pretty good, but really rootkit arsenal is the latest. If you need to test rootkits, you can get conceptual code, you can get breakdowns of that on how to actually test those in environment without actually rootkitting your system in a way that's going to destroy systems on your network.
So another, process injection, probably one of my favorite techniques that malware uses. You have process Halloween, and you get a good process. You start a good process, and you replace it with, your infected process. But eventually, to the naked eye or a regular person, the good process, the bad process looks just like the good process. So it's a good way to get hidden and throw it in there and throw away throw your team off for a bit. Process injection too, a lot of different ways you can do it too. You can do it by create a remote thread, and to create thread, you can suspend your threads and then inject your code, and then resume your thread again, and then you have code injection. Again, not visible to regular eye, but definitely a good technique to try out and get them to detect it. Again, process anomalies. You see this a lot with malware, right? You have SVC hosted launching. a command prompt, should that really be happening, or should, it's launching I think that my favorite one is when it launches a process that has a similar name to something that get passed by your regular IT people, right? For example, Netcom, it's a network communication executable, it should be fine. Or, the simple one, IO Explorer, you pop, and you launch a command shell. Obviously that should stand out. Icons missing and abnormals, obviously you see sometimes malware trying to get past, again, regular users. Oh, this looks just like my Word document application. I'm just going to go ahead and open it. So definitely something that you want to look at, try to test for. And then in the parent and child relation, a lot of times you see malware, starting up a process, starting up a child, kills the parent process, and it just hides, try to hide its tracks between that relation. You kind of want to be able to track that, have your team be able to show where the initial vector was, attack vector was, what started what. So I just thought that was an interesting point.
One thing that I thought I had inside this, and I actually must have not put in or something, is there's a thing that you can look for in process anomalies that's kind of cool. You can look for the original file name. Someone that's developing a piece of malware might have named it malware.exe, something like that, and then they rename it to javaupdater.exe. If you can go look at those original file names, basically write a script. I've got a small script that does partially on those. You can go find those original file names, and that is something that you can just write an iexplorer.exe to launch on a system that doesn't really do anything, just make it do a loop with sleep or something like that, and make sure the original process name is something like malware.exe, and then see if your guys are finding things like that. It's not necessarily doing anything malicious, but it's something that should be a detectable method for you guys to be able to find it, and it helps increase the intelligence of your guys to be able to detect those. So another thing is network traffic anomaly. This is off the systems to kind of look at what's going on. Command.exe, cmd.exe connects out. That's obviously an issue if it's connecting out HTTP or something like that. Connections to 667 IRC. Your system connecting one of your client systems, connecting up to one of your core systems, like your domain controller, that should not be connecting up in that format. Set up these kind of traffic anomalies intentionally, so that they're sending that kind of traffic in that location. It's a detection method, it's a way to test the scenario in a way that's not malicious. Alright, now we're going to go a little bit on what you can use, where you can get some things to run these tests. Where can you get this kind of concept to test the things that we just went through?
So Metasploit, obviously we all know Metasploit. Basically the idea here is to, there's no need for you to go ahead and code a very complicated command and control application or try to break your head in finding one that was leaked and try to clean it out. You can use Metasploit, code your malware up, or whatever is the technique you're going to choose, and have Metasploit serve it up for you. Again, you can even use set, and once the malware connects back, just have Metasploit be your command control server. There's no need to, again, very simple. Sorry, that's me. So malware dumps. The latest leak was Cabot leak. Huge dump. Personally, I have not gone through it all, but definitely skim over the code that's found interesting. Again, you see a lot of DL injection code there, process injections, UAC bypass. I think there's a couple exploits in the actual leak too that's been talked about. But again, point being is, you have code there. It's really source code that you can take, read, understand, take it apart, and implement it into your own test executable. The other thing too, forums. There's a couple forums out there. I personally just follow because I like them. There's no underground forum that I follow that requires a blood test or anything like that. But it's just, people like to share, people like to be helpful, and people just like to ask questions, and they say, how do I do this? People, here's how you do it, and the code's there for you. So definitely good example to kind of keep that going.
So I did it all in black and white, so there's you guys' animation. So use some rats. A lot of malware uses these. No reason you can't use them. Just know how to control them, know what they do. Poison ivy is a very popular one. YTK fake creator is actually one that I don't really see anybody ever using, and it's actually highly effective. It creates fake YouTube sites that you can use to basically phish people for infections. Plenty of other options here to be able to use rats and perform your tests. This is really my favorite one. This is the one that I would suggest the most. Develop your own. You guys probably have developers inside of your network, some kind of developers. Malware comes in all forms. It doesn't just come as an executable written in C, actually not as much anymore at all. It comes in a lot of scripting, C#. You don't need to worry as much about some of the obfuscation methods that are used through malware to be able to prevent reverse engineers, because you're not trying to trick reverse engineers. You're trying to do detection and figure out how the scenarios are. Now, if you're trying to test your guys to see if they can reverse engineer it, I would just suggest go grab a real piece of malware for that. But write your own. Use your developers for this. Not only are you going to get a second resource from your security department on someone that knows how to develop malware from that perspective, you can also get your own custom version of testing inside your environment. One thing that is a big misconception in this is malware is just code, really. It just breaks down the code. So you can go up to your developer and say, hey, can you write something that downloads and plants an executable and then executes that executable to set up a persistent registry key here? Don't tell them it's malware. Tell them to just write that program. They can write that program. If you go up and ask them to write malware, they will be like, I don't know how to write malware. But if you tell them how to do the steps that you want to actually perform it, they might be able to just write your malware for your testing for you. And this can be multiple ways that you can do different, unique kind of testing. Read books like I listed before, the rootkit book or something like that. Those are going to give those guys also a lot of source code, and if they're already programmers, the right kind of programmers especially, they can do this for you.
Or if you want to write your own, just a couple mentions of books that I personally read, that I've, like I said, been through the journey. Probably the only book that I've read back from back to cover was the Practical Malware Analysis book. It has labs, doesn't have much of sample code, but definitely has a breakdown on how to look for things, where to look for them, and it's more of a low-level disassembly look. Then you have the Malware Analysis cookbook. There's definitely code samples there, scripts, and it's an awesome book. And then the other two are just basically your Windows kind of internal of how Windows works. So 5 books, definitely recommend them.
All right, and eventually us. So Juan and I develop a rootkit, or a malware kit. We're in development right now of it. It's something we're calling snippets. It's snippets of malware code techniques. Everything from DLL injection to rootkits to process injection to basically we're developing a malware kit that you can do a 1, 2, 3 step and it'll create your malware dynamically for you. We're obfuscating it in ways that we know it's effective to defeat AV, and we're not sure what we're going to do with this yet. We don't want to release it completely, because if we release it, then we're going to see a lot of our code end up in real malware. So we're still trying to figure out how we can actually use this to supply for you guys. One of the ideas is we're going to have a website with some snippets of the code, the snippets code itself supplied, so you guys can actually go to that resource, get the snippets, and be able to compile your own versions of malware in a way that it won't be too destructive. And I'm going to go through an example of that here in a minute. And really there's more to be determined for us. We're still trying to figure out how to actually make this a resource for you guys, for anybody out there that wants to perform this testing without making a resource for malware creators. Alright, here's a little bit of a conceptual demo. This is just an idea on how you can perform this attack. This is a simple version of it. This is basically a way that you can start out doing it. So, phishing email comes in, latest employee Google contact application, has a link to Sites Google. Use Google Sites, it's awesome because it's on Google, nobody's going to block Google. You could set up your own custom site, and you can set up the resources for all the downloads in this. It's a really good resource for malware, and malware uses it a lot itself. Good. Alright, so you go to the site, says something like this: you must update Java JRE7, download. You guys probably can't see this, but the download link was to Dropbox user content and into a Dropbox folder. I obfuscated my ID, obviously. Use Dropbox for your resource. Malware is doing this. These are things that live samples are doing. They're using SpiderOak, they're using Dropbox, they're using public resources to be able to store their malware downloads so that they can not have detections, not block their DNS servers. Use their same techniques. Again, Google, the download goes to there. All right, just one simple thing that you guys can do to make this a little bit harder on some people as well. After they downloaded the application, just open up CFF Explorer. CFF Explorer has UPX Packer utility. UPX is free. You can go get it for free out on UPX's site. I can't remember the name of the website. But this is an easy way for you guys to perform it. Just get CFF Explorer, UPX Packer utility, click pack, there you go. And it's got different compression levels and stuff. So once the malware is down on the system, download it from the Dropbox site because you need to update Java. You double click, Java Updater, says you have been updated Java.
Where's that ASCII toolbar?
Yeah, well, mine's a little bit better than theirs. So what it does, it drops Internet Explorer, or drops iExplorer.exe inside the temp directory. This obviously is not really Internet Explorer. Sets up a persistent handle. I used a simple method here. This is the run HK current users run. Just set up through the temp directory, so it'll auto start on each load. And what the malware does itself is it's just a simple keylogger. Now, we don't want to do testing with a real keylogger on Internet Explorer or anything like that. Usually you do that through DLL, revert back, be able to log out, do set Windows hook EX to be able to do the keylogging off that if you're using basic handle. So this does the set Windows EX on the controlled process of the malware that's persistent itself, which means it's essentially sniffing nothing that matters. There's nothing that is relevant that's sniffing. But when it goes through to do the export, when I get back down to where I'm going to export it up to the control server, I manually write into the file that does the exporting what would look like a keylogger item, and then I send that up to the server. So we're logging nothing, replicating what a logger would look like, creating that data and sending it up. This is something that you guys can perform inside your network to make things look like malware without performing what malware does, and give you the capability to replicate even the data on the network the way that malware looks. All right, any questions?
I thought it was interesting and curious how you didn't want to release as it was the code because it might be usable by, say, black hats. That's kind of different from a lot of other security tools that go out there. What would you say the difference is? Why you're kind of like that?
I'm using techniques inside of this that I don't see in current malware. This isn't something like, say for Metasploit, they release a lot of proof of concept exploits, actually control exploits and all that kind of stuff. Most of those are generated off a lot of proof of concepts that exist out there. They're open, they're things that exist. I'm doing things right now inside of that I see no malware at all out there doing. I'm bypassing AV and new techniques. We're developing this to be as advanced as we can. So I don't want to give them techniques that they haven't thought of yet. Now, this is where I'm saying we will probably try to break this down into a simpler format to either give simpler controls that are actually used out there or use something that does exist. We're not going to give them something new if it's already out there. But I don't want to give them, I got an AV bypass technique that I've tested against every piece of AV that I can install with some common malware techniques, and they just absolutely don't even care anymore. And there's things like the upclick attack, if anybody's familiar with that. I wrote a little algorithm that does the upclick attack that bypasses sandboxes, to where it detects the upclick on a mouse, and because the sandboxes don't use that same technique to do the upclick, it's bypassing sandboxes so they can time out on that. I wrote an algorithm on this that actually sets timers on the way the upclicks are pushed in, because right now the way that sandboxes are bypassing this is they're just shoving a bunch of upclick commands onto the buffer. I'm writing an algorithm that looks more like a human clicking algorithm instead of a just detection of an upclick. And I don't really want to give that algorithm necessarily out until I see somebody using it. It's more of just staying at least good to a certain degree to where I'm not supplying them with something new. Anything else?
You're just doing this on the client-side services
what part?
Any of it really, so like, I mean, how do I go from the fish to actually, like,
Well, see, the exploits are what's tested through your pen tests and your vulnerability assessment. So it's less about the exploit. So you're talking about what do you do once you get the phishing actually in? This.
So it sounds like you're more testing the client, like laptops or workstation.
It could be anything. You can take your domain controller and put something. You obviously don't want to put a piece of malware on there, but you could send a very simple application on your domain controller that does nothing but connects out to HTTP and just queries Google. That should not be happening, and if that happens, then it's something you guys should be looking at inside your environment.
So using your techniques, and if you were just dropped out of one computer in a large enterprise, what would your recommended approach to finding that one guy?
My personal approach that I like trying to define things, if it's not a rootkit, if it's just a normal variant piece of malware, find how it persists. Malware is really, that's one of the biggest difference between malware and pen testing aspects, is malware wants to persist. Find all those persistent techniques, write scripts, write queries, write clients that actually go in your system that watch for all those persistent techniques. There's an interesting tool from Mandiant for the DLL hijacking. You can actually scan your system to find all the variants of DLL hijacking. Use that tool in different ways to pull back things that are vulnerable to DLL hijacking and see if any one of them have a variant by doing basically the same crawl that would take for the DLL to load. If there's one before where it should be loading, that's an anomaly from the rest of the network. The best detection techniques that I've seen any place is anomaly. If something looks different than the rest of your network, what you have is you have a huge sample base of 2,000, 3,000 computers. If this one looks different, you should look at it. And if there's a registry key that's inside of this one that's not in your other 2,000, you should probably look at that one.
Just another question kind of around implementation. So we're talking about new ways of doing testing. Are there any best practices emerging yet? Like how often you do it, or if you do it internally, externally, or that's all kind of still being.
Nobody I know does this.
Okay.
Nobody. I'm talking with a company that's. I work for Tenable and I'm in research, so I don't do pen tests. I don't do testing or anything like that. I'm talking with a company that's local where I live, and trying to set them up with getting started on this. It's very beginning stages to be able to do this, and I want to allow them to offer this as a service for somebody to come to them and say, we want to perform this test, we want to see how we're reacting with malware, and doing the same kind of service that you would with a pen test where you hire them to perform a pen test.
Can we use part of this presentation to try to convince our management that we want to do
sorry,
this?
I'm thinking,
Can we use part of this presentation to convince our management that they should let us do this?
Yeah, use it however you want to. Adrian puts all of the videos after he edits them up on the, I know he puts them up on his site, they're off YouTube. I'll post the slides up for all of it, and that last demo that I put right here, that conceptual demo, I'll post the source. Actually, if I intended to do this. So one thing, the Java updater's original name was Treader. I just randomly typed something in. That's one of those different name detections. If you guys want a simple resource, here's the source for that. I'm going to post most of the source. There's like my simple backdoor that I use, and this actually completely. So I wrote this in about 4 hours yesterday, based off some of the things that we have in snippets and just pulling things together. It didn't take me very long to actually write it, but I didn't encode my strings like I normally encode them. You can see down here I got different kind of encoding techniques for strings so that I can obfuscate that. But this function right here will load all WS232 functionality up into memory, use the row hashing technique to be able to find the parse the export table, give you all the function pointers to be able to do that, and then give you the simple capability to do the send and receive off that. I'll post some of this stuff up so you guys can actually use this in a way to perform that testing. That's a very simple backdoor, That backdoor doesn't, if you look at the imports or exports, or imports actually in this situation, it's not going to show the imports for network connection, easily bypassed, and it's something fairly simple to start this kind of testing with.
So for people that are new to the malware environment, you were saying that you had forums and whatever. I mean, I know people get asked questions, you know, how do you start, where do you look, that type of stuff. And since you guys have already weeded through most of that, is there anything that you can recommend, advise, or suggest for new and upcoming people to go through so they're not having to go through the same pains of getting through some of those websites?
Yes, and so specifically for sites, I think everybody's got their favorite. I've got a few. I like Hellbound Hackers forum. There's actually some interesting stuff with that. I like evil.com. There's a few things like that. They have a lot of malware samples on it. There's different malware sites specifically that have forums, and there's developers of malware posting on that. I can post some of that stuff up when we post some of the slides. I'll have the slides posted publicly and post some of those links. But really, if you're just getting started in malware, get started in reverse engineering. That's the first step, and you can look in things like the practical malware analysis. If you really want to do it like hardcore, go grab some malware off of Contagio or malware.lu and dive in. Figure out as you go and start figuring out what you don't know, so you need to figure out what you do know. I can't tell you specifically because I don't know if you know how to program in C. Do you know x86 ASM? It depends how far back I need to be able to tell you where to start.
Gotcha.
I would say if you're concentrating on Windows, Win32 development's almost essential. If you don't know what the API calls are doing, then you don't know what it's doing, and you need to know what the API calls are doing first. Anybody else?